Welcome to Cider Chat. It's part 8 of the Building a Cidery series. And in this episode, we're going to look at what it means to own a virtual cidery. Hello, my name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. We have a special guest on this week's episode, one who makes an occasional appearance more often than not, helping us out in Ciderville kind of untangle some of these concepts that I like to delve into, and I think you do too out there in Ciderville. So we're going to be getting to that featured chat coming up, and I'll reveal that mystery maker. But first, we have a wee bit of news out and about in Ciderville. Up next, we have a cider review. This is from a startup cidery. And this same guy, by the name of Sean, sent me a bottle last year in 2020. And at that time, when I opened it, I had two folks from the Franklin County Cider Days Committee with me. And that would be Al Sachs and April Woodard. Well, luck had it that just this past week, they were back at my home having another meeting about Cider Days as we're planning for 2021. And when Sean sent me a second bottle, I knew that I was going to be saving it, if I could, to enjoy with both Al and April, which is what we did. So we're going to go there next and give a little bit of audio feedback to Sean. In a green bottle, I can see there's a little bit of effervescence here. Has a nice B on it because his last name is Blaze. See, so nice presentation there. Very nice. And
light straw colored.
Beautiful clarity.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like the nose.
Oh, it's
Nicely carbonated.
Floral, I would say. Daffodils.
Oh, super floral.
It's super like a blossom.
Like daffodils,
Yeah.
right?
Reminds me of like what you'd get like with a wild yeast. That kind of floral. A little bit like the profile that I get from New Salem Preserves. The
bubble gum tropical fruit.
Jackfruit.
Jackfruit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a jackfruit and blossom.
Ooh. But nice and crisp.
Crisp. A little tannic structure there too.
Yep. The finish is got a little bit of you got a nice a lingering finish.
It has some acids that wake up your senses that I think really pair well with the nose on this.
Yeah. When I smell it, I didn't expect it to taste like this.
I love ciders like that. It's like a delightful surprise, and it's like a two-part story.
Like kind of like a smoked.
There's a little smokiness right before you get to the very end of this.
Yes.
It's nice,
Yeah.
and I enjoy it because there's a lot to sort of experience when drinking it. It's a nice sipper. And I would think it would be great pairing this.
The classic like little charcuterie board would be just absolutely delightful.
Be great.
And then for a main dish like the whitefish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want pizza.
You want pizza?
I want pizza with like roasted vegetables to go with that sort of smoky, yummy, like something like that you roast on your grill and you throw on there, and then.
But you wouldn't drink this with a chili, right?
With chili?
Yeah. Guess it depends on how hot your chili is.
It would feel too acidic to me for all that. That's why I wouldn't really go for the pizza. But this,
it depends on your
cheese,
pizza.
so it's like,
listen to the specs on this. I haven't looked at this since it came in like over the first of the year, so I totally forgot what it is. It's majorly wild crabapple, he writes. It's a dry cider aged for 120 days. So that's, like 4 months. 3 or 4 months. Yeah. A little going on 4 months.
Yeah, more like 4 months.
So wild crabapple. And if he says majorly wild crabapple, which they all feel pretty wild, I'm thinking that it is that wild yeast.
Yeah.
So interrupting for 1 second.
Yeah.
Because as this is opening up more, I just took another sip, and it's something new has come to my mind, which is that there's some saline quality in there.
Oh.
Yeah, I feel like a salty saline kind of quality as this is bloomed. It's opened into that.
I just got a little bit of a bubblegum hit.
Well, that's a jackfruit.
Yeah.
We were saying like juicy fruit, jackfruit, and
Juicy fruit. Right.
that's really the really unusual. I only really tasted that in a couple ciders, and the most predominant in our area is from New Salem.
Yeah.
That's exactly what their wild ferments taste like. I could crack a bottle of that and bring it out.
Yeah,
and show you.
I like that.
It also has Northern Spy, Smokehouse, and Empire mixed in.
Nice.
He's calling this a cider. I thought this cider was a dry, full-bodied cider with a nice mouthfeel and perceived sweetness from the tannin. And I got hints of lemon and ginger on the finish. Ginger.
Oh, that's I said grapefruit, lemon. It's in that category.
What about ginger, though? Are you getting ginger on that finish? Well, Sean, I can't say that any of us got the ginger that you were writing about, but I do know that your cider goes very well with Chinese food. You really knocked it out of the park, and that's the beauty of cider. I mean, it has a way of just melding with food and making it a level playing field so that the spices are not too high and the apple kind of comes through, and it was such a bright, crisp cider. Man, you are on the road to success. Thanks for taking the time, sending that bottle my way, and my ability to share it with some really fine cider drinkers is such a pleasure. And if you're out there in Ciderville looking for a little bit of audio feedback or review of a cider, you can send it my way. Just send me an email to ria@ciderchat.com. And now it's time for our featured conversation with a very special maker who has been on Cider Chat, I believe, more times than anyone else on this here podcast, besides, of course, the Talking Pops, who are usually in the cider house. Whether or not they're paying attention to me, I don't always know, except Mr. Quince, who's waving at me to kind of continue on. All right, so this maker I met probably, I think, for the first time in person in 2018 or so, I guess, and that was at a competition known as the Great Lakes International Cider and Perry Competition, and then he invited me up to his country, the country of Canada, a place where there's a lot going on, including a brand new Canadian Association for Cider Makers. So I'll be following through on that in a subsequent episode. But let's stick with this particular maker who has really, I think, really stolen many people's hearts here on Cider Chat, because every time I have him on the podcast, he really delivers. So as I was building out the Building a Cidery series, I knew that I had to speak to him because when I first met Ryan Monkman, that's who we're talking to, he had a Virtual Cidery, and that was back in 2018. Since then, his brand, FieldBird Cider, is now a brick and mortar establishment with a tasting room and an orchard. But back in 2018, Ryan was doing some things that you don't really hear about too much in the cider world. So I thought this is a perfect time to bring this conversation to you. So we're going to start with hearing Ryan's definition of what exactly a virtual cidery is.
A virtual cidery is when you run a cidery out of someone else's cidery. There's such a thing as like a private label, which is where a cidery will make a cider line for somebody, right? For somebody's wedding or for a grocery store chain or something like that. And it'll be made at a cidery, but the labeling will reflect, not their brand, but someone else's. A virtual cidery is similar to that, except you're creating the private label yourself. So you're doing the actual work of cider making. Effectively, you're launching a small cidery using someone else's space and equipment and licenses. Where the term comes from, virtual cidery, comes from my wine background, and there's something called a virtual winery, which is a semi-common thing, especially up here, where a winemaker will have an agreement with another winery to use their space and their equipment to produce wine, and then will sell the wine but typically is not granted retail space in the winery shop. So they sell virtually, so online or to restaurants or to liquor stores.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have a physical space that they own.
Mm-hmm. Well, we see this in the craft beer world. They would call it contract brewing. But in that case, the brewery who is, the large production facility, they are doing all the packaging. The virtual brewer, in this case, who's contracting that major production plant, is kind of showing up occasionally to check out the product, but they're the main production facility. And we're seeing these pop up all over the U.S. now. So would you say that's similar, contract brewing, virtual
It is
winery?
similar. Yeah, it's very similar. And there's like all things, there's a spectrum when it comes to virtual cideries, which is, how much of the work do you do versus how much of the work does the host do? In some cases, it's you only do the sales side, and the host does all of the production and all the packaging, etc. And sometimes you do everything. And there's mechanisms in Canada, and some virtual wineries and cideries do this, where they actually get their own licensing. So one facility actually has 2 licenses. So the host has their own license, and the virtual cidery or virtual winery has their own license, but they applied for the license using the facility of the host. So then in that case, the virtual cidery is doing all the manufacturing, all the packaging, all the selling, and all the reporting and all the tax payments. They're doing everything. So it's a spectrum of how involved you want to be. What I think the best part about it is a step toward creating a cidery that has a much lower risk and upfront cost than starting just building a cidery. Mm-hmm. So that's its biggest benefit is whatever your level of involvement, it is inherently less expensive than building your own space. And if done well, can be a benefit both for the virtual cidery and the host cidery. Because the host cidery, gets a little more promotion. They get, you pay them for use of the equipment in the space. And you can also do collaborations together. Mm. So if managed well, it can be a positive for everybody.
Did you set up a contract then, an agreement, if you will, with Keint-He?
So we were based at a Keint-He Winery, and we had an agreement in place that laid out the financials as well as who was responsible for what, things like that.
Is there any advice from the virtual maker's perspective on selecting the right host site to do that with? Was there something about Keint-He that really drew you to that, or were you shopping around at different spots besides like proximity to your home?
Actually, there was 3 really important things about Keint-He, and it was an amazing experience for us, and we're so grateful to them for helping us get started. The 3 things that mattered most were the people at Keint-He. So both Brian, who owns and operates it, who was really supportive of me in my career as I got started in this. And at the time, although he's moved on to another winery, my good friend Lee was the winemaker there. So being able to have someone who I trusted, and could work out equipment sharing and stuff like that with, that we already had a relationship of trust in place. And then the other side of it is their equipment and their space was set up for the style of cider I wanted to make. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make barrel-aged, barrel-fermented cider, still cider. And Keint-He focuses on barrel fermented and barrel aged wine. So they have a large barrel cellar. They have all the equipment necessary to clean barrels and maintain them. That was a big attraction as well. So for those three reasons, we were a really good fit. The team and I got along very well. The space itself was set up for it. And kind of we were able to be clear about, what the expectations were of everybody. And one of the things that Keint-He, just as a demonstration of how generous they were toward us, is that it is very uncommon for Virtual to have access to the retail space. But Keint-He actually encouraged us to sell through their retail space and gave us like good shelf space and ran tastings for us and all sorts of things. Like just even from the sales perspective, they were very supportive of us.
I would think it would be a win-win for a site hosting a virtual cidery, especially if the product is coming out so well. It has to be another feather in their cap, wouldn't you think? Or why wouldn't a host site want to do that?
It's the reason it's uncommon is it can get complicated quickly. So, I mean, there's an argument that it can, and there's an argument that it can cannibalize sales. So if someone's going into Keint-He and is going to spend a certain amount of money, and they spend some of that money on my cider instead of their wine, then essentially Keint-He has lost some sale, right? With our situation where we were cider and they were wine, there wasn't as large of a risk there. But that is a risk people are worried about when it's a similar product. The other thing is it can get complicated on staffing and things like that. So, Keint-He's sales team was representing us and pouring tasting for us and all that kind of stuff. And it can get complicated as to who's responsible for paying for what.
Did you shop around, or was this the first winery that you thought this is going to fit and went with it? Eh?
You're looking to form a relationship. You might have a couple first dates with different people, but pretty early on, you know who you want to be with. And that was Keint-He.
So when you were going into this, this was your business plan from the get-go, to set up a virtual cidery, and in the meanwhile be looking towards setting up FieldBird as it is now, with a tasting room and an orchard on site. Is that true? Yeah.
So the goal was to get going quickly and limit initial capital expenditures, right? And we were able to do that by, we didn't have to pay for a building or major equipment and stuff like that. I was basically only paying for, fruit and, some services and packaging and barrels and that kind of stuff, but I wasn't paying for tanks or pumps or hoses or a building or other staff or things like that. And the other thing we wanted to do was like a proof of concept. So still cider, let alone barrel fermented, barrel aged still cider, at the time and still now is a rarity in Canada. To be honest, I didn't know if it was a rarity because it wasn't being done, or was a rarity because it had been done and failed miserably. So I wanted to make sure that the type of cider that I wanted to make had a home for people. Because how you design a cellar for what we do, which is, and we're happy that we found a home and a following, and people have been really accepting of us. But how you design a cidery for the work that we do, which is heavily focused on barrels. And our methods of carbonation, when we do carbonate things, I'd say about 40% of our products are carbonated, is generally bottle conditioned or traditional method, or I think in America, method champenoise, or I can't remember the phrase you guys use.
Yeah, we use a little bit of everything, of course.
Okay. But setting up a cidery like that is very different from setting up a cidery where you're focused on, fermenting quickly and carbonating and flavoring and canning.
Right.
So as an example, our cidery does not have any bright tanks because we don't use bright tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Our cidery does not have a canning line because we don't can anything. Our cidery doesn't actually have very many tanks because the only things we use tanks for are immediately after pressing juice goes into tank. And then basically the next day it comes out of tank into barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And then we use tanks to blend stuff before bottling. So we don't, our setup's a lot different from like our neighbor cideries. And the way we were able to design our cidery, we gathered that information from doing the virtual.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to come into our cidery, you'd see that it looks exactly like a winery and nothing like a brewery, versus most cideries tend to look like breweries and not like wineries.
Right, with all the stainless out front and kind of like you're in the brew pub setting. Yeah. When you built your barrel room, now Keint-He just has this amazing underground tunnel room filled with all these oak barrels, all on at floor level. They're not all stacked up. Now I've seen some photos of your site. You're above ground, right? Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, we're above ground and we use barrel racks to stack.
Yeah.
So,
is there anything that you wish, that barrel room that in the virtual setting was just phenomenal? Is there anything that you miss in that way? I have to guess that you probably really miss that barrel.
I desperately want that barrel room.
I know, everybody does. I do too. Gosh.
We're able to do temperature and humidity control in our facility for barrel aging.
Sure. Yeah.
But one of the things about us is we're trying to form like a biodynamic closed loop on the farm and in the cidery. And part of that is limiting inputs. So trying to reduce things added. And one of the things we add right now is heat in the winter and cool in the summer to maintain a good temperature above ground.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Versus Keint-He's barrel cellar, because it's below ground, it's fairly consistent temperature year round and it doesn't need any temperature modulation in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to move to that model in time.
Going underground?
Going underground for the barrels.
Yeah.
And for our tirage room. So our tirage room is in a old stone / cement barn and is fairly self-sufficient on temperature regulation, but on cold days we have to add a little bit of heat. But generally stays the right temperature for us.
Can you explain what tirage is?
Oh, tirage is when it's secondary fermentation in bottle. So when you do traditional method sparkling, when you bottle, you add a little bit of yeast and a little bit of sugar, and the inside of the bottle, the yeast eats the sugar and creates bubbles and also creates lees. And we age our bottles on their side in bins for, the time changes, but we have some stuff we age for a year, and some stuff from 2018 we're still aging and intend to age for a couple more years. Mm-hmm. And that more closely resembles the traditional method, which is generally 1 to 5 years of aging. But that means that we need to have, up to 5 vintages of sparkling cider lying on their side in these cages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called entourage. So we call the room, the space where these bins are stored, the tirage room. And we generally keep it at 14 degrees Celsius.
I have been in Eric Bordelay's tirage room, if you will, which is at the basement level of his castle. And there's all these like air vents coming in, and you go into this area and it's just like, filled with all these bottles on the side. Of course, he also keeps his barrels down there too. And not everybody has a castle, with a bottom floor like that. But these are the things that people, we don't think about. We kind of, building a cidery, just putting up a quick utility kind of building and doing that. But to really give the cider the weight in the long run, to do the aging that you're talking about, that a lot of modern cider makers don't do because that's not the style they're doing, is really a different approach to cider making, yet a very old school approach, right?
Yeah, and it's fun and it's what we like doing. And there's something like exciting about bottling something and knowing that it's not going to be released for 5 years.
I love that about you, Ryan.
So like, for starters, anyone who knows me, and I hope I haven't hit this hammer too hard on the podcast, it's like, I really fucking hate bottling. Like with all my heart, I hate bottling. I hate it. I don't like
blame
doing
you. Yeah.
And to be honest, it's not the actual mechanics of it, because the best thing that can happen on a bottling day is nothing breaks. So the best thing that can happen is you have a really boring day. But what I hate about bottling is it's the end of something. I don't like endings.
Mm-hmm.
When you bottle something, it's quote done. But when you put something into tirage, it's not done. Right? It keeps going for years.
Yeah.
And you can check on its progress. We have tools that can check its pressure. We open bottles every once in a while to do tasting analysis and things like that. But it's like barrel aging, but like way slower.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. I love having a tirage room.
Well, most people don't think about that for cider. They don't realize that cider can age 4, 5, 10 years, 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's unique and something we both know we're going to be seeing more and more of by so many makers coming into this loop here. All right.
But to answer the first question is, I'd love to get the barrel cellar and the tirage room. I would love to get underground. The problem we have is the area we live in, it's generally about 2 to 3 feet until you hit bedrock.
Oh dear.
So it's a little more complicated than it lets on. Sometimes it's better to build thermal mass up rather than build thermal mass down.
Right.
So like our tirage room is, thick stone and cement and maintains a pretty consistent temperature year round. And the cidery where the barrels are, we have to keep some climate control in, but we're trying to lessen that as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess where Keint-He is located, it must be where the glaciers dropped a whole bunch more sand. I don't think they really had bedrock in that location.
It's the old beachfront, so there's a lot more sand there. Yeah. So it goes deeper, and where the building is. But right. 20 feet away from the building, you're back to what we call hillier clay loam, which is 3 feet deep.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, exactly like you said. There's a big dumping of sand there.
Right.
And basically nowhere else.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So I wonder, were there some unexpected costs now looking back running a virtual cidery?
Yeah. So, there's expected costs, which are basically, think of it as cost of goods sold and cost of sales, but, almost no, unless you want some sort of specialty item, really no capital expense. The unexpected cost, plan for some sort of unexpected expense. equipment loves to break when you're using it. And you're going to be using someone else's pump or someone else's bulldog or someone else's press or something like that, and it's going to break, right? And to be blunt, the best thing that you can do as the guest is to fix it. Don't quabble over something like that, right? Because the host is already giving you so much. If something breaks while using it, whether it's your fault or not, just fix the damn thing. So like that is the expected unexpected, if you will.
Yeah.
Just generally be wherever possible, be a good guest.
I imagine that goes back to your relationship initially, that collaboration of space and sometimes products and equipment. It really stems from making sure you set that up correctly to begin with, and also having an agreement in place. Was that built into your agreement that you would be helping out in that way, or that is just Ryan Monkman, who is, one of the smartest people I know?
It wasn't that kind of particular thing wasn't built into our agreement, because the agreement wasn't fairly long. It was more a letter of understanding.
Okay.
And most decisions were, trusted to be made in good faith. I mean, there were moments of conflict, as there are with any sort of relationship. And it takes time to work through those conflicts, but there's always a fair resolution to be made. But, one of the things you need to be aware of is that it isn't your space. So be the best you can. And when you haven't been, or you've made mistakes or anything like that, own up to it the best you can.
Right.
The onus is really on the guest, the virtual, to be a solution finder and pragmatic and all that stuff, because the host is providing so much and giving so much to you.
Yeah, good time to remain professional and a good problem solver, and really working on your communication skills. If you could do that, and you need to do that with going to any business, because even, people think going into business for yourself, I'm going to be my own boss. And then you realize that you're working it more than you would otherwise if you were like working for somebody else. You really have to up that skill level. Yeah.
Doing a virtual is a good way to launch a business with less risk. That can be helpful in any number of situations, but one of them is it can be helpful if you're trying something new. It can be helpful if you're not sure that this is something you want to do, like someone who makes cider at home and thinks to themselves, oh, it'd be great to have my own cidery where I was the cider maker. It's a good way to try that out to see if it is a good fit for you. It's also a good situation if you want to do like a mixed funding model. It's an okay way. It's not a great way, but it's an okay way to have some revenue coming in early on before major capital expenses. So if you want to fund a cider, like an actual brick and mortar cidery, there's, any number of ways to get money to do that, from loans to investors to, your own money. A good way to fund things is through sales. And it's also helpful when you go to investors or the bank or whatever to say, look, I have a product that's sticky, that's got pull.
Right.
No one else is doing it. And, if we can get this funding, then we can go bigger.
Oh, yes. FieldBird Cider is getting bigger, not only producing their own ciders on site, but in terms of doing collaborations with other cider makers. And one of those particular cider makers is a cidery in the U.S., and kind of mum's a word right now on that, but it's a very exciting collaboration that you'll be hearing more about. And he has some other ones that are always coming out too. Well, now, Ciderville, I just lost power at Cider Chat Central. There are gale force winds outside, and I think probably a tree hit a line, and it's going to be probably a full-on evening of total darkness because I'm way out in the country, and I hope nobody goes up on those lines to work right now because it is windy out. And that just goes to show you, right? That saying is true. March comes in like a lion, and we are definitely all hoping out like a lamb. Should be interesting. Anywho, it's all good, and we'll get this podcast up and out for this week here. It's going out on March 3rd. And this also ends the Building a Cidery series for now. So you have parts 1 through 8 if you go to ciderchat.com and you go to the show notes for episode 262, which you are listening to now. And at the bottom of the show notes, you will see all the links to all the episodes in this series. Really fascinating, and I've learned quite a bit. And who isn't jazzed to do a virtual cidery? I mean, pretty doable, right? But really, in the end, it's going to come down to, can you translate the recipes or the apples that you have into a quaffable cider? That's true no matter whether it's virtual or it's a tasting room in an urban location or way out in the country, all barrel fermenting or orchard base. It all comes down to that relationship with the apples. And before I go, I just want to put this out here that next week there will be no episode of Cider Chat, but there is going to be a YouTube video going up at the Cider Chat YouTube channel. And that's going to be with Dr. Cameron Peace from Washington State University. It's his lecture on apple identification. And it's going to be the story and the research behind following the genetics of the apple. It's really fascinating. And you can now send in samples to Dr. Cameron Peace, Washington State University, and get your own apple tree sitting out in your yard that you've been wondering about, or that roadside apple tree that is just making amazing cider for you, and find out its lineage. How cool is that? So look for that being posted out on social media next week. And I will be returning. I just have to get a little bit of stuff done. So, I'm never too far out and away from you in Ciderville, it's just really kind of nice for me. So with that, I'm going to get ready for an evening, make sure there's lots of wood on the fire, and make sure everything's safe and sound. I heard a tree cracking out earlier, so I want to go look on the property and see what's going on. Oh, my goodness. So with that, I'm going to leave you here. This is Rhea Windcaller. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Cider, we like palms, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider.
Oh, yes, we do.
We like palms.
Oh, yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There's a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like palms.
Oh, yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!